Welcome back to HFI Covenant. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. I'm bringing you an original piece of human-written work of science fiction, so dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to step into a world beyond imagination. The world ended at 06 swim time hours, local sun. Lyra did not see the orbital strike coming. She heard it, a subharmonic keen that split the frequency band her ears were tuned to register as danger. A sound her species had evolved to flee. She was already turning toward the blast shield when the command post detonated, and the pressure wave lifted her like a thing that weighed nothing and threw her into the red earth of the great kiln with the casual indifference of a god clearing a table. Then there was silence. Then there was heat. She came back to awareness in increments, the way a system reboots when the primary power has been severed. Her HUD flickered across her left eye, cracked at the corner, still functional. 0621 hours, 7 minutes. She had been unconscious for 7 minutes. The command post was a crater of fused silica and burning composite. 2 of her officers lay at the perimeter. She did not look at them long enough to catalog their conditions. There was no sound of approaching aid. There was only the wind, and the wind here in the kiln smelled of scorched silicon and copper. And very far away, the retreating burn signature of her own fleet pulling out of atmosphere. Her fleet, leaving. Lyra attempted to stand. The signal from her legs arrived at her brain as a concept only, intent without execution. She pressed her palms flat against the glass sand and pushed, and her upper body rose, and her legs did not follow. The spinal shock registered in her HUD as a cascade of amber warnings, not severed, compressed. The medical subroutine estimated recovery in 48 to 72 hours. Assuming she did not die of ambient heat exposure first. The ambient temperature was currently 119 degrees Fahrenheit, and climbing toward the afternoon peak. She was going to die here. She calculated this without sentiment and found the mathematics clean. Your cooling array is destroyed. The voice came from behind her. Low, very low, the kind of frequency that did not travel so much as arrive. The kind that a Valari felt as a pressure in the sternum before the ears parsed it as language. She turned with her arms, dragging herself, and found him. Ian stood at the edge of the crater. He was covered in debris grit, and the left sleeve of his labor uniform had been burned away entirely, the skin beneath red and already starting to blister. His right hand was pressed against a cut on his scalp that was bleeding freely down through the close-cropped dark hair above his ear. He was upright. He was as far as her HUD's biometric reader could parse from 12 feet away, completely and unacceptably functional. His heart rate was elevated. His respiration was fast. But he was standing in the wreckage of an orbital strike, and he was standing like a man waiting for a transport. Tired, mildly inconvenienced, and not dead. I am aware, Lyra said. Her voice was steady. She had trained it to be steady since she was 12 years old. How are you still ambulatory? Ian looked down at himself as though verifying the fact. Look, he said. And I was on the north side of the post when it hit. Blast shadow. He looked back at her, his eyes, dark, expressionless in the way that had always unsettled her. A species that did not shift eye color to signal emotion, moved to her legs. He understood. She watched him understand. Above them, beyond the curtain of smoke rising into the pale amber sky, her fleet continued its retreat. No extraction signal, no recovery beacon response. Just the slow, indifferent arc of ships leaving a battlefield that had been decided against them. My communications array is partially functional, she said. I will signal for extraction. You do that, Ian said, and did not move. The extraction signal bounced 3 times and died. Lyra held the silence that followed it. In 14 years of command, she had issued death sentences from orbit and watched star systems unmake themselves on her tactical display. And she had not, in any of those moments, felt the precise texture of this one, the specific cold of understanding that she was the variable that had been subtracted. The hegemony's tactical doctrine was explicit on the matter of compromised high officers in contested zones. Retrieval was a resource calculation, and resources were not infinite. She had written portions of that doctrine herself. No response, she said. No, Ian agreed. She looked at him. He was still standing at the crater's edge with the bleeding scalp wound and the burned arm. And he was watching her with an expression she had catalogued over 16 months of captivity as his neutral expression, which was to say the expression of a creature that had elected not to show you what it was actually calculating. It was, she had decided some months ago, his most dangerous expression. "You should go," Lara said. The words were precise and clean. She meant them as a gift, which was a thing she had very little practice offering. "My legs are non-functional. I am a logistical impossibility. If any of my secondary officers survived and are mobile, they will move toward the extraction corridor at grid reference 7. You know this terrain better than they do. You have an acceptable chance of—" "No," Ian said. The word landed with the same texture as his voice, low, final, without drama. "That is an order," Lara said. "I am still your commanding—" "With respect, Commander," Ian said. "You stopped being my commanding officer the moment your fleet left you here to cook. I'm operating on an older contract now." He moved down from the crater's edge into the rubble, stepping over a collapsed support strut. He crouched beside her with the easy, economical flexibility of his kind. She had observed that humans spent their first waking minutes bending and rotating their joints in a way that no Valari would have found anything but theatrical. But the result was a body that moved without the stiffness her own species carried in their longer limbs. He looked at her legs. He looked at her cooling rig, which was a crumpled catastrophe of ruptured polymer tubing and fractured heat sink panels along her spine and ribs. He looked at the distance. "What older contract?" she asked, because the tactical subroutine that was always running in the back of her mind needed to understand the variable. "The one that says I don't leave people in the desert to die." He reached for the torn edge of her tactical cape, which had been a deep hegemony violet and was now the color of oxidized clay, and began pulling it free from where it had pooled beneath her. "I am not people," Lara said. "I am the entity that has held you in a high-security detention facility for 16 months. "Yep," Ian said. "And you are choosing, voluntarily, to— I need about 8 feet of this fabric." He folded the cape against the glass sand with methodical precision, testing its tensile strength with a pull that made the weave creak but hold. "Your armor's got 2 anchor rings on the chest plate, right? From the lift harness protocols?" She stared at him. "Yes. Good. This is going to be uncomfortable." He began to fold the cape into a wide band. "The trade outpost at Korath's margin is 60 miles northwest. It's neutral ground. We get there, you get medical attention. We both get off this rock." 60 miles, Lara said. "Across the kiln," he agreed pleasantly, as though he were confirming a dinner reservation. "In this heat. The morning's the best part of the day for it, actually. Gets worse around midday." He looked up at her, and for a moment the neutral expression cracked open at the edges into something she could not categorize. Not humor, not quite. Something older and more complicated. "So let's not waste it arguing." The harness was artless and effective, 2 qualities Lara was beginning to understand as characteristic of the human in general. He had fashioned it from her tactical cape using the anchor rings on her chest plate as the load-bearing points, running the folded fabric over his shoulders and across his chest so that her weight sat high on his back, rather than dragging from it. He had padded the rings with strips torn from the labor uniform's hem. He had explained none of this to her while he was doing it. He had simply done it, testing each knot with sharp tugs, adjusting the balance, and then said, "On 3, and lifted her. She did not make a sound. This she attributed to discipline, which was partially true. The other part of the truth was that she was too busy processing the experience of being carried, of having no agency over her own horizontal motion for the first time in her adult life, to spare the processing power for noise. Ian set his face northwest and walked. The Great Kiln was not a desert in any soft sense of the word. It was a geological verdict. 60,000 square miles of shattered silica plate, glass sand that had been superheated by an industrial event 3 centuries prior, and cooled into a fractured, razor-edged plane that caught the light and threw it back doubled. There was no sand here in the sense of something fine and shifting. There was only the glass, and the shadows between the glass, and the heat that radiated up from both invisible waves. The ground cut. Everything here cut. Her HUD tracked distance in a small readout in her peripheral vision. 0.3 miles, 0.7 miles. The sun climbed. She had expected him to struggle from the first steps. The Valari weight distribution was unusually dense due to their high-density mineralized skeletal structure, and the harness was improvised, placing a staggering amount of torque on his lower lumbar. She had performed the calculation before they left the crater and produced an estimate of 4 miles before physical failure. At the 2-mile mark, she revised the estimate. At the 5-mile mark, she revised it again and stopped revising. Ian walked with a cadence she had not anticipated. Not the rapid, energy-expensive gait of a creature trying to cover distance quickly, but a long, measured stride that ate ground without announcing itself, a rhythm that seemed pulled from somewhere below conscious effort. His breathing was audible, it was controlled. He breathed out on every third stride with a small, deliberate release, and she felt it through her chest plate, where her sternum was pressed against his shoulder. At the 7-mile mark, she noticed the moisture. It began at his temples, a slight gleam that she initially catalogued as a trick of the light. Then it appeared on his neck. Then it was moving freely down the back of his collar, soaking into the labor uniform's fabric. And she understood with a sudden, visceral clarity what she was observing. She had read about it. She had the biological files. But the files had not prepared her for the reality of watching a living thing exude liquid through its skin. As a cooling mechanism, as casually and continuously as a machine venting steam. The smell of it reached her, salt with something underneath that was entirely organic, the chemical signature of a body working at capacity. "You are," she said, and stopped. "Sweating?" Ian offered. He did not sound offended. He sounded faintly amused. "Yeah, that's going to continue. It is a thermoregulatory response," she said, because saying it clinically made it easier to process. "Best one evolution ever handed anybody," he agreed. "Your people never got it. We have internal cooling systems, technologically augmented. The biological ability to regulate extreme temperature was engineered out of the Volari genome 4,000 years ago in favor of enhanced neural processing, leaving us entirely dependent on external cooling arrays." "I know," he said it without emphasis. He knew. He had known since the crater, and he had built the harness anyway and started walking. The HUD read 9.4 miles. She watched the moisture continue to rise from his skin. This ridiculous, magnificent, deeply alien mechanism. And she found she did not have a category prepared for what she was feeling. The sun reached its apex, and the world became a white problem. They had found a shallow overhang of fused silica, not shade exactly, but a geometry that reduced direct exposure, and Ian had stopped beneath it without explanation, set her down with the same careful, impersonal efficiency with which he set down everything, and drunk half of the water from the single canteen he had salvaged from the wreckage. He handed her the other half. She drank. The HUD read 14.2 miles. They rested for 11 minutes. Then he hoisted her again and walked. It was in this second stretch that she asked him, "Why don't you kill me?" Ian did not break stride. "Not really my department. I have been a net negative entity in your life for 16 months. I have given you orders that caused you physical discomfort. I have not intervened when my subordinates treated you with contempt. I am, by any rational accounting, a cost to you rather than an asset." She watched a bead of sweat trace the line of his jaw. "You could have left me in the crater. You could have taken the water, taken the harness material, and increased your own probability of survival by a significant margin. The utilitarian calculation is not difficult." "Utilitarianism," Ian said, "is a useful philosophy until the moment it asks you to leave someone in the desert. That is not a counter-argument. That is a preference statement. Most arguments about whether to let someone die are preference statements dressed up as math." She considered this. The glass sand crunched beneath his boots. "You said you have a duty to life. Something like that. Elaborate." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the gravelly register of his voice had settled lower than usual, into the frequency range she felt more than heard. "There's a version of the human moral framework, not universal but pretty widespread, that says a life in front of you is a specific obligation, not an abstract one. Not humanity should help other humans in the collective sense, but this specific person, right now, in front of you. That's yours to answer for. And I am in front of you. You're on my back," he said, which is even more specific. "I am an enemy combatant. Yeah, I have, through my military actions, contributed to the deaths of—" "I know what you are," Ian said, without heat. "I've known for 16 months. You're still breathing and you're still in front of me, and those are the two relevant facts." He stepped over a ridge of fused glass that caught the light and threw up a brief, blazing fan of refraction. "The duty doesn't have exceptions for 'not nice to me.' If it did, it wouldn't be a duty. It would just be selective kindness. Lyra processed this in silence. The concept was not, as she had initially assessed it, sentimental. It was structurally rigid. It was a rule that derived its integrity precisely from its refusal to bend toward convenience. She found, to her considerable discomfort, that she respected it. Among my people, she said finally, this would be considered pathological. Among mine, Ian said, it's considered the baseline. The HUD ticked to 17.8 miles. Her eyes had shifted, she realized. Not fully, but the amber was diluting towards something paler, more gold. She was feeling something she did not immediately have a word for in her own language. She searched for one and found only the closest approximation. The Volari term, for the moment when a structure you have analyzed from the outside reveals that its load-bearing principles are entirely different from what the exterior suggested. She did not share this observation. She looked at the northwest horizon and said nothing, and Ian carried her through the white noon of the great kiln without slowing. She heard the ship before her HUD flagged it. The harmonic was Valeri. She had been trained from childhood to distinguish hegemony drive signatures. And this was a Crestline-class scout. Low and slow, a recovery pattern. Lyra's hand moved to her signal bracer before Ian had time to say anything, and she sent the beacon code, Commander grade. The frequency that would cut through any interference. Wait, Ian said. It is a recovery unit. If any of my secondary officers... Wait, he said again, and his voice was low and tight, in a way she had not heard before. And she waited. The Crestline class dropped toward the far end of the impact zone, the place where, her tactical display confirmed, 2 life sign signatures had been reading faintly since the strike. Survivors, her people. The ship hovered 20 feet above them for a long moment. Then it opened fire. The energy discharge was clean and total. When the light faded, the life signs were gone. The ship continued its grid pattern, methodical, sweeping toward the central crater. Lyra did not breathe. Down, Ian said quietly. And he was already moving, not running. Running would catch sensor attention, but walking fast and low along the shadow line of a silica ridge, carrying her with him. And she felt the harness dig into her chest plate as he descended the far side of the ridge and into the dry wash of a shallow ravine below it. He pressed them both against the rock glass wall in shadow. Above the ravine's lip, the Crestline class continued its pattern. They are sanitizing, Lyra said. Her voice emerged with a sibilance she could not entirely suppress. A stress register that Valerie voices defaulted to under extreme duress. The melodic precision she had cultivated over decades had thinned to something reedy and too sharp. They are removing evidence of the defeat. Including you, Ian said. Including me. The realization had the texture of something she had known for some time without permitting herself to know it. The fleet's retreat. The extraction signal's death. The timing. It had been constructed, not accidental. Someone in the high command had decided that a crippled high commander, captured or recovered and capable of testifying to the scope of the failure, was a more dangerous liability than a dead one. I am a loose variable. Lucky for you, Ian said, watching the ship's shadow track across the ravine's lip. Loose variables are my specialty. He adjusted the harness where it had shifted in the descent, checking the load-bearing knots with quick, practiced pulls. Signal bracer. What? I need you to not use it again. They'll triangulate. Lyra looked at the bracer, the device that connected her to the hegemony, to command, to protocol, to the architecture of her entire life's service. She removed it and set it face down in the glass sand of the ravine floor and pressed her palm against it, until the casing cracked. Ian watched her do this. Something moved in his expression, not pity, she would not accept that it was pity, but something with weight to it. 55 miles, he said. 45.8, her HUD corrected. Good, he checked the sky one more time through a gap in the ravine wall. The ship had moved to the northwest, away from them for now, but on a vector that would bring it back in a standard sweep pattern. He did the same calculation she was doing. She could see it in the brief stillness of his face. We move when it clears the ridge. We stay in the ravine system as long as the terrain allows. And we don't stop. Agreed, Lyra said. She said it to his back, because he had already moved into position to lift her again. The afternoon burned everything it touched. By the 26-mile mark, Ian's boots had given up. The glass sand had done what glass did to anything that moved across it long enough. and without armor plating, abraded, cut, worked into the seams and reinforced soles until the composite separated and the heat-treated rubber peeled back in strips. He noticed this, insofar as she could tell, approximately the same way he noticed all physical setbacks. With a brief downward glance and a small pragmatic adjustment, he tore the remaining sole material off both boots and wrapped the canvas in strips of my armored tactical cape, creating improvised, metal-reinforced buskins that would allow him to grind through the razor sand. Lara's HUD was running a passive biometric scan. She had been running it since the second hour. It had become, she recognized, a compulsion. His heart rate was 138 beats per minute. This was a figure her medical subroutine flagged, because for a Valari, pushing 140 results in immediate withdrawal from the field. She had watched Valari soldiers in training push to 140 and be pulled from the field. 161 sustained over hours in this heat would have been a clinical emergency. Ian's heart beat 161 times per minute, and he cracked a joke about the weather. It was not a good joke. It was the kind of flat, arid observation that humans deployed when they were doing something difficult, and did not want to grant the difficulty the dignity of silence. Heard this part of the kiln gets a nice breeze in autumn, he said. I can see why people vacation here. There are no people in the Great Kiln, Lyra said. I'm here. You are a special case. High praise. He stepped over a cracked plate of fused silica that rang like ceramic under his foot. How's the spine? Unchanged. The amber warnings in her HUD had not worsened, which was the extent of the positive news available. She felt nothing below her hips, which was both medically concerning and, given the terrain they were crossing, possibly merciful. The spinal compression is a pressure injury rather than a structural one. The medical prognosis remains conditional on reaching treatment within getting somewhere that isn't here, Ian finished. Essentially, the 30-mile marker appeared on her HUD with a small automated tone she had not programmed and had not expected. She stared at it. 30 miles. She looked at his feet, the thin canvas dark with blood now at the right heel where the glass had found a way through, and at the set of his shoulders, and at the slow, steady working of his jaw as he breathed out on the 3 count. She ran the calculation again. Valari male, similar physical parameters, carrying her weight across this terrain and this heat and this duration. The answer was the same as it had always been. The answer was not possible. Ian, she said. The biometric data I am reading suggests that your cardiac and thermal load is beyond sustainable parameters. Yep, I am telling you this because you think I don't know. He said it without irritation. I know. The difference between knowing and stopping is about 30 miles. He shifted the harness, redistributing her weight slightly leftward. Tell me something about where we're going. Take my mind off the fact that this planet hates me. She looked at the northwest horizon. 46.2 to go. Korath's margin, she said. It is a neutral trade designation under the Concord Agreements. Hegemony jurisdiction does not extend to. Tell me what's there, food-wise. She found herself, against all probability, almost smiling. There is a market district. The Dravali vendors are known for a braised preparation of a local. Perfect, Ian said, and walked. She was losing consciousness in increments. This was the heat partly. Without her cooling system, her body temperature was rising in slow, steady increments that her HUD flagged with the same patient disapproval it had been applying to everything since the crater. She was not built for this. Her species had removed this vulnerability 4,000 years ago, and in doing so, had built a different vulnerability: absolute dependency on technology, absolute fragility when the technology failed. Ian noticed before she did. Stay with me, he said, not unkindly, just a fact he needed from her. I am with you, she said, which was only partially true. Tell me something, anything. She tried to locate a topic. Her mind felt distant and cottony at the edges. Tell me about persistence hunting first, she said, because she had catalogued the concept in his file, one of the few pieces of human prehistory she had found relevant to his capacity as an asset, and she wanted to hear him explain it. She wanted to keep the low frequency of his voice as an anchor. He was quiet for a moment, setting his pace against a long stretch of flat glass plate. Early humans, he said, didn't have the best natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no real speed advantage. We couldn't outrun an antelope, Couldn't outmuscle one. The 3-count breath, out. So we found something else. We could sweat. And we could keep going after an animal had decided we'd stopped being a threat. Another long stride. You chase something long enough, in enough heat, it starts making decisions. It runs fast, it overheats. It rests, you close the distance. It runs again, you just walk. Keep walking. The animal doesn't understand what's happening to it. The predator isn't faster. The predator just doesn't stop. The prey exhausts itself running from something that will not exhaust, Lyra said. That's the whole trick. A pause. Applied it to a lot of things after wars, exploration. Generally, if something tells humans it can't be done and humans really want it done, the response is basically, okay, we'll just keep going until it gets done. He navigated around a low silica fin that jutted from the ground like a fractured rib. This is the same principle. We don't have to get there fast. We just have to get there. You are persistence hunting 60 miles of desert. I'm persistence hunting the distance between here and there, yes. Lyra looked at the horizon. She thought about what it meant, truly meant, that a species had evolved this mechanism, had built its entire survival strategy not on being the most powerful or the most armored or the most lethal, but simply on the refusal to recognize when it had been defeated. She thought about every military assessment she had ever read that classified humans as death worlders and focused on bone density and pain tolerance and the adrenal cascade without mentioning this. That the most dangerous thing about the human was the part that could not be measured with a caliper or a stress gauge. That kept walking. That found it faintly funny that this planet hated them. That carried the thing that had commanded his imprisonment through 60 miles of knives and heat because a person was in front of them and the contract was older than convenience. Among my officers, she said, the Death Worlder classification was applied to your species as a warning. As in, do not engage in close quarters. Do not allow to obtain weapons. Do not permit coordinated groups. She paused. I believe we classified the wrong thing as dangerous. What should you have classified? The part that keeps going, she said. The part that decides the distance is irrelevant. Ian said nothing for a moment. Then, you're not losing consciousness anymore. No, Lyra agreed. She wasn't. Her HUD still read the ambient temperature as lethal, and her core temperature was still climbing, and she was still helpless on his back with 41 miles left to cover. And she was not in this moment losing consciousness. She was paying attention. The droid came out of the dark between 2 silica spires at the 43rd mile. It was a sanitization unit, a hegemony design, which meant she knew its specifications better than she knew most of her officers' faces. Quadrupedal chassis, armored to resist small arms and shrapnel, with a sensor array rated to detect biological signatures within 400 meters in standard conditions. In the Great Kiln's heat haze, the range was reduced to perhaps 200. They had gotten unlucky, or the scout ship had updated the droid's patrol grid. Either way, it stepped out of the shadows between the spires with the patient, unhurried precision of a machine that had already decided the outcome and had no interest in dramatizing it. Ian stopped. Can you disable it? He said very quietly. Not from here. Not without a functioning weapons system. She was running calculations so fast the HUD was struggling to render them. The chassis armor will resist anything we have available. Its sensor array will... Tell me where it breathes, Ian said. It does not, she understood what he meant a half-second later. The ventilation intakes for the internal drive systems are located at the ventral connection points of the rear 2 legs. They are the only unarmored surface. How far off the ground? Approximately 18 inches. Good. He reached up and with the same flat efficiency he applied to everything, unclipped the harness and lowered her to the ground behind a low silica shelf. He settled her against it. He met her eyes. Stay here and keep your head down. This is going to be loud. Ian! He was already moving. She watched from behind the shelf. The droid registered him at approximately 40 meters and recalibrated immediately to the new biological signature. A human, not a Valeri, which was an anomaly that required reprocessing. And in that 1.3-second reprocessing window, Ian crossed half the distance at a dead sprint. What happened next, she would spend a significant amount of time afterward attempting to file under an existing category and failing. The droid's first strike caught him across the left shoulder. She heard the impact from 20 meters away. A dense, resonant crack that her anatomy told her should have separated the joint entirely. Ian's momentum carried him through the blow and past it, into the droid's underframe, and she saw him take the second strike against his forearm in a block that was clearly deliberate, using the dense calcium structure of his radius as a literal shield. The droid's impact sensor registered the unexpected density and recalibrated. That recalibration cost it 1.8 seconds. Ian used them. Both hands found the ventral intake on the rear left leg. He drove his elbow into the connection joint with a leverage technique she recognized from no military manual she had ever read. Purely mechanical, using his body as a crowbar against a gap that was 18 inches off the ground. The casing buckled. He did it again. The drive system made a sound like a crystal bell struck too hard. The droid's rear assembly seized. Ian used the compromised leg as a step and drove his full body weight down through it, and something inside the ventral housing sheared, and the droid's locomotion system went offline in a cascade failure that took 4.2 seconds from the first impact to the last. Then there was silence. Ian stood in the droid's wreckage. His left arm hung at a specific angle that indicated the shoulder had been dislocated. There was a deep laceration along his forearm, where the block had stripped skin. He was breathing with the controlled deliberateness of someone managing something that hurt a great deal. And he walked back to her with the same pace he had walked everything else, and crouched down and said, "Ready?" "Your shoulder," Lara said. "I know." He reached up with his right hand, gripped his own left arm, and reset the joint against the silica shelf in a single quick movement. She heard it. She did not allow herself to react to it. He tested the range of motion, winced, and picked up the harness. "I've got another reset in me before that shoulder goes non-functional. Let's not use it." She looked at him for a moment. The blood on his arm, the wrecked droid behind him, the extraordinary, unconscionable fact of him. And then she let him help her back into the harness. 16 miles, she said. 16 miles, he agreed, and walked. The 50th mile came and went without ceremony. Ian had stopped talking approximately 2 miles earlier, which was the first time in the entire crossing that silence had settled between them, in a way that felt different from companionable, quiet. This silence had a texture. It was the silence of a machine that was still running, but had begun to run on reserves that she did not know the depth of. His gait had changed. The cadence was intact, the 3-count breath, the long measured stride, but the angle of his head had dropped slightly, and twice in the last half-mile, she had seen him lift his eyes to the northwest horizon with a focus that seemed to require effort. As though the horizon kept moving, she had read about heat exhaustion. She had read about the hallucinatory stages. She had read about the specific, terrible moment when the body's thermal regulation itself began to fail under sustained extreme heat, the point at which even the sweating mechanism could no longer keep pace with the load. His core temperature was 102.8. He was pushing the absolute thermal ceiling of his species, radiating heat like a dying star, yet he did not break stride. "There is a ridge," Ian said, apropos of nothing, in a voice that was slower than usual. "In the New Mexico desert, I walked it once, with my father." He paused. "The 3-count. Different kind of desert, not glass, red rock." He said, "If you're still moving, you're still okay." "Your father was a soldier?" "Scout. Like me. Different context." He was quiet for a moment. "He died of something boring, not a desert. Heart." Another pause that was slightly too long. "I keep thinking I can see him on the ridgeline. I know I can't. I can tell the difference. But I keep seeing it." Lyra did not tell him this was a symptom. He knew it was a symptom. What she did instead was something she had not planned and did not examine the impulse behind. Because if she examined it, she would have found the category it belonged to, and she was not ready to assign it. She took the edge of the harness cloth, her own tactical cape, hegemony violet now clay red, torn and knotted and soaked through with 16 hours of his sweat, and she used it to wipe the salt crust from the corners of his eyes, his temple. She did it carefully, methodically, the way she had once as a young officer, maintained the equipment she trusted her life to. Ian did not comment on this for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Thank you." "You need the visual clarity," Lara said. "It is a practical measure." "Sure," Ian said. She wiped the salt from the other side. Her hands were clumsy. She had never had to perform fine motor tasks at this ambient temperature, and her joints ached in a way her cooling system had once rendered irrelevant. She did it anyway. "Tell me about the ridge," she said. "Red rock. My father said the desert doesn't care about you." He meant it as a comfort, which sounds backwards but isn't. The desert isn't against you, it's not personal. You're just an element in it. Makes the walking easier if you don't take it personally. This desert has tried to kill us in several specific ways. The hegemony arranged for most of those. Desert's still neutral. The too long pause again, and then he steadied, visibly. She felt the alignment of his spine change through the harness. A correction of posture that was a conscious act. "I can see the outpost lights." Her HUD confirmed. 10.0 miles. At the edge of its range, the faint infrared bloom of population density. Korath's margin, with its market and its Dravali vendors and its neutral ground designation, was real, and it was ahead of them, and the only thing between here and there was 10 miles, and the man on whose back she had ridden for 50. "Tell me something true," Ian said. "About yourself. Keep me company." She thought about what she could offer that was true, and not tactical, and not classified, and not a performance. She found something small and real. "I was afraid of the dark until I was 16 years old," she said. "I was a high commander's daughter, and I slept with the lights on until an instructor found out, and told me I would never command if I was afraid of dark spaces." She paused. "I was not afraid after that. But it was not because I stopped being afraid. It was because the shame of the fear was larger than the fear itself." Ian was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is the saddest version of courage I've ever heard." "What is the unsaddest version?" He walked. The lights at the northwest horizon grew infinitesimally, painfully clearer. "This one," he said. The HUD read 59.1 miles. At the moment the trade outpost perimeter lights became visible to the naked eye. Ian said nothing. He had said very little in the last 4 miles. His breathing had changed again, not the controlled 3 count anymore, but something rawer and more effortful. A rhythm that was still a rhythm, but only barely, held together by something that was no longer physiology and had become something else. Something she did not have a Valari word for. She had been considering this for several miles, and had arrived at the tentative conclusion that her language had a gap in it. He walked. The outpost perimeter wall materialized from the pre-dawn dark as a low bulk of pale composite. Its gate lit with the amber lanterns of a neutral settlement. No faction colors, no heraldry, only the universal signal of a place that would trade with anyone and shelter anyone who could pay or prove themselves useful. 2 figures were visible at the gate. Outpost security, Dravali from the silhouette of their wide cranial structure. Lyra calculated angles. No Valari presence visible, no hegemony military markings on the gate architecture. The scout ship's patrol route had not extended this far northwest in the sweep pattern, or it would have reached them hours ago. They were going to make it. She understood this before it happened, and found that understanding it in advance did nothing to reduce the weight of the moment. 59.6 miles. Ian's left leg buckled on the last long stretch of flat glass sand, and he caught himself with an effort that she felt through every point where her body made contact with his. A shudder, controlled. A thing that should not have been controllable but was. And he straightened and kept walking. 59 miles. The Dravali guards had seen them. One lifted a lantern. A voice called out in trade dialect, asking for identification. 60.0 miles. Ian walked through the gate. He walked 8 feet into the perimeter, and then his legs did what they had been told not to do for the last 20 miles, and he went down, not falling exactly, but lowering. The way a structure settles when the last tension member releases. Slow and then complete. He set her down first, both knees in the glass sand, and he unhooked the harness with hands that shook visibly now, and he got her clear of his weight. And then he lay down in the dust of the trade outpost of Korath's margin, and he did not move. His heart rate, the HUD reported, was 147 beats per minute. His core temperature was 104.1. His left shoulder was compromised. His right heel had been bleeding for 20 miles. He was, by every measure available to her, at the absolute edge of what the human system could sustain and still return from. He was alive. The Dravali guards had gathered. One was already calling for medical. Lyra heard at the outpost's edge the sound of boots, quick military boots, the specific cadence of hegemony personnel, 2 or 3 of them, off-duty or embedded here on some secondary function. She heard one of them stop. She heard the sub-vocalization that preceded a weapon being drawn. Lyra reached the fallen pile of harness cloth, and from it took the emergency blade that Ian had salvaged from the wreckage at the very beginning and never used. She held it in a grip her combat instructors would have recognized across 30 years, in a hand that did not shake. "This human," she said, and her voice was not melodic, and it was not precise, and it came out with a sibilance she did not bother to suppress because some things did not deserve to be said calmly, "is under my personal protection. He is designated untouchable under Concord Provision 7, Survivor Clause. Anyone who raises a weapon toward him answers to me, in whatever capacity I still hold, that answer meaningful." The hegemony boots were silent. She looked at the guards, Valeri, young, eyes wide and amber with uncertainty, and she held the blade and held the silence until the weapons went down. Then she looked at Ian. He had not seen this. He was lying with his face turned toward the pre-dawn sky, still breathing, alive in the death worlder way, surviving things that should not be survived, because they simply had not been told that survival was optional. His dark eyes were open. He was watching the stars still visible above the outpost's light halo with an expression she finally had a category for. Peace, simple, impractical, bone-deep peace. The expression of something that had finished what it started. She lowered herself to the ground beside him, not gracefully, not with the composure her rank had always demanded, just down. And the medical team was coming now across the compound, and she did not look at them yet. "Ian," she said. He said, which she had learned over 60 miles, was his version of full attention. "I need to tell you something true," she said, "about myself." He waited. "I was wrong," Lyra said, "about what was worth measuring." Ian turned his head. The dark eyes found hers. Whatever he read in her face, her eyes had shifted fully to pale gold. She could feel it, the amber entirely washed out by what she felt. He held it for a moment in that characteristic, infuriating, magnificent neutral expression. Then he said, "I know." The medical team arrived, and the sun came up over the great kiln, and the glass sand caught the light and threw it back doubled, and 60 miles of it lay behind them. And between the two of them, the human who carried and the commander who had been carried, something had been made that was not yet fully named and was already immovable. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it. This channel is all about original human-focused science fiction, and every story is presented as a part of a larger